We've already done a similar video about octopuses getting ready for death, and I thought, why not check out other smart animals that do something similar? And who can be as smart as an octopus? An orca. But this one is complicated. Well, on November 6, 2023, a group of observers and researchers noticed something strange in the waters north of Lapa Island in Norway. A male orca was acting very unusually. It was clear he was in trouble and seemed to be preparing to die. Two other orcas huddled together nearby, holding the male at the surface so he could breathe. Orcas can stay underwater for up to 15 minutes, but they usually come to the surface to breathe every few minutes. It was clear the male felt really bad. He was exhausted, but his group just wouldn't let him die. For almost an hour, they kept him at the surface, until they finally gave up. But even when the male died, the orcas kept fussing around him. They swam back and forth, trying to revive the male. This might be the first instance when the death of an adult orca was recorded in the North Atlantic, and possibly anywhere in the world. But the story didn't end with the male's death. An hour or two later, observers from another ship saw young orcas trying again to keep the male at the surface. It's unclear whether the male survived and managed to rise from the depths himself, or if his body was pushed up by his kin. And then there's a question. Why did the orcas stop the male from dying? Or was it preparation for death? But then, what was it about? Well, the intro took a while, but oh well. Now some coffee. Oh, I didn't get much sleep today. Just an unobtrusive reminder to hit the like button if you forget to do it. Okay, first we need to figure out how orcas and other cetaceans actually die. The most common opinion sounds like this. In old age, the whale simply suffocates and drowns because it can no longer rise to the surface and breathe. But there's one catch. No one has ever seen a cetacean drown without human intervention. No stranded whale has been autopsied to figure out the cause of death. We humans assume that old whales drown because they have to keep using energy to reach the surface. But in reality, adult whales don't need to swim too hard to stay afloat and breathe air. The only exception is calves, who haven't yet accumulated enough fat for good buoyancy. The most likely reason an elderly whale dies is that it can't catch prey and slowly loses strength from hunger. Basically, it's similar to top predators on land. Orcas have a neat trick, though. They can share food among themselves. For instance, there's a known case where a disabled orca missing two fins was fed, supported, and cared for by its family. But it seems like this is an isolated example. It's quite possible that the ability of orcas to feed a family member depends on luck, the type of orcas, the prey they eat, the size of the pod, and a bunch of other factors. Care can't save everyone. The old cetacean slowly realizes it can't hunt like it used to, so it's time to prepare for death. The animal becomes less active, barely shows any interest in food, and doesn't interact with others, and when it has no strength left, the whale just sinks to the bottom without much struggle. The fact that other orcas tried to help and keep the male at the surface seems to be a sign of caring, but if air was the only problem, the male wouldn't have died. It just lived to its limit and couldn't struggle anymore. By the way, old age for an orca is 70 to 80 years old for females and 60 years for males. It's believed that the oldest orca lived up to 105 years, but there might have been a mistake in the calculations. What happened after the orcas left their dead companion alone? It's known that orca carcasses fully decompose over decades and can provide food for an entire ecosystem on the ocean floor. Shortly after death, decomposition processes begin. An orca can bloat because of the gas inside and even float to the surface. If this happened to our male, he probably became dinner for sharks and seabirds. But they all released excess gas and the male started to sink, slowly going to the bottom. And down there, they're already waiting for him. No, it's not like sea creatures have a schedule for when orcas die, but every such case is a celebration. Regardless of how deep the orca died, after death it still became a source of food for a bunch of animals. They can feast on the body of an orca for over a year, sometimes even up to 2 years if the orca was large enough. How long has it been since the male died? Less than a year? The feast is in full swing. Demersal fish, crabs, lobsters, and lots of other scavengers are eating the fat and muscles down to the bones. Eventually, the body turns into a pile of bones ready to be collected and taken to a museum. But this needs to be done before the Osedax worms get involved. They were first discovered in 2002, and since then, scientists know that these are the most important animals responsible for bone decay. The worms break down collagen and fat, add oxygen to the bones, and this speeds up the decay process. If you think about it, worms that eat bones are like something out of a horror movie. Fortunately, they only eat carcasses. Worms like Osidax muciflorus, whose name literally means bone-eating snot flower, bore their bacteria-filled root system into the bone while their feathers flutter in the open water absorbing oxygen. Deep in these roots, the worms produce acid and enzymes that break down various elements of the bone, and they don't just eat bones but also reproduce right there, releasing many eggs into the water column from which larvae hatch. Then they settle on nearby bones and continue to break them down. Anyway, our male still has a long way to go before he meets the worms. It'll take at least 10 years. And then between 10 and 50 years later, bacteria will take care of the bones, producing hydrogen sulfide, a gas that smells like rotten eggs. They'll completely break down our male orca. Oh, and then I remembered the heart-wrenching story of a calf of an orca named Tahlequah. It was born on July 24, 2018 off Vancouver Island and died just minutes later. Afterward, there were many reports of Tahlequah carrying the dead calf on the surface for a very long time. It was seriously so long. In total, the mom carried the calf on her head for at least 17 days. Perhaps all that time, the orca was trying to keep the baby above water so he could breathe. Together with her calf, she covered approximately 1,000 miles. Tahlequah's relatives sometimes helped her carry the dead calf and may have even fed her throughout this time. The calf, already dead, slid off its mother's snout more than once, and each time the orca dived to retrieve it. I'm telling you, it's a heart-wrenching story. Eventually, Tahlequah abandoned the calf's body because it began to decompose. And although it's seen as an expression of grief, like mourning, try looking at the situation from another angle. Orcas are known to support their dying kin at the surface so they can breathe. So maybe Tahlequah's actions were indeed a desperate attempt to save the calf. Think about it. It makes sense. But conclusions, of course, can only be drawn from indirect evidence. Does what's happening resemble mourning? Definitely. By the way, scientists are confident that not only Tahlequah, but also members of her pod interacted with the calf's body after its death. They carried it, lifted it, swam around it. According to the director of the Whale Museum, all this is like a wake or funeral practice adopted by orcas. Such ceremonies can last for several days so that every member of the pod can pay respects and mourn the loss. Sometimes orcas surround their dead comrades, showing curiosity. In other cases, they go even further. They stand guard near the bodies and keep them afloat. Scientists also point out that Tahlequah's behavior isn't unique. Other orca mothers frequently carry deceased calves on their heads. Tahlequah simply did so for an unusually extended period. In general, that's why I assume she was trying to save the calf. By the way, anthropologist Barbara King, who studies animal emotions, is convinced, in the case of Tahlequah, it was indeed genuine grief. People often mistakenly attribute human qualities and logic to animals, but this is not one of those cases. Orcas are very intelligent and very social. That's enough for them to experience real grief. After all, feelings like sorrow or love are not exclusively human, and who else can get these feelings if not orcas? Researchers describe Tahlequah as an incredibly attentive mother who seems to treat her offspring with great tenderness. She played with her first calf longer and more than orcas typically do. Then, most likely, Tahlequah had 1 to 2 unsuccessful pregnancies, which affected her deeply. 17 days of mourning is indeed long, but for a mother of her nature, it's more than understandable. Several biologists confirm that orcas can grieve. Melissa Regente, a biologist from the University of Milano Bicocca in Italy and co-author of a 2016 study on this topic, emphasizes orcas experience pain and stress and know that something bad has happened. During another study, there were reports about how orcas held dead calves in their mouths, pushed them through the water, and touched them with their fins. And also, well, just in case you need additional arguments, during these 17 days of mourning, females from Tahlequah's pod gathered around her in a tight circle. It was an act of clear emotional support that lasted at least 2 hours. So I did a bit of Googling. It's believed that animals' ability to grieve is linked to brain size, cognitive abilities, and the skill to form strong social bonds within their group. In the case of orcas, they tick all 3 boxes. Knowing all this, reports of orcas caring for the sick and preventing them from dying seem the most natural. I already mentioned a disabled orca that was fed by its pod. This is a young male who lost 2 flippers, along with the ability to hunt. However, instead of being abandoned or rejected by its pod and left to die, the guy found protection from other orcas. The pod had 7 orcas, 5 females, a massive male, and a young disabled male. While the others hunted bridge whales, a species of large baleen whales, the finless male stayed at a distance and didn't join in. Yet he still got food. These observations are one of the few pieces of evidence that a wounded orca can survive with the help of its pod. In 1996, a group of researchers found that another orca calf was missing its tail and part of its dorsal fin, which were believed to have been cut off by a boat's propeller. The wounded orca, named Stumpy, was not seen for many seasons and was presumed dead. Then Stumpy returned, and it turned out he was perfectly fine. Rather than sticking with one pod, Stumpy swims with at least 5 different ones, and they all feed him. Once, observers saw 2 females dashing through the waves, each carrying a big herring for Stumpy. They also guard him from boats, so Stumpy doesn't get hurt anymore. In short, the guy's got a good deal, considering his situation. But let's get back to mourning. According to the latest news, it's manifested not only towards the offspring, but also vice versa. In March 2024, there was a report about a young orca that refused to leave a lagoon off Vancouver Island. She entered the lagoon with her pregnant mother, but she died during a seal hunt, accidentally throwing herself ashore. Dozens of people tried to overturn the stranded female and give her water, but the orca didn't survive. Over the next 5 days, rescuers tried to return the baby to the sea, but instead the 2-year-old female moved further into the lagoon. The situation was complicated by the fact that there's a 30-minute window each day when the water rises during high tide. This is enough for the baby to float out. The rest of the time, it's too shallow and the current is too strong. But the young female continued to stay in the lagoon as if mourning her deceased mother, or perhaps she was waiting for her return. Rescuers tried to guide the calf into the ocean using orcas' acoustic cries like these. It didn't work. None of the other methods worked either, even though the rescuers seemed to have tried everything they could. For example, they tried to capture the orca and transport it using a rope. It didn't work out. The young female turned out to be too smart. Around 10 boats tried to herd the orca using oikomi pipes to create a loud noise underwater. These pipes are made of reverberating metal, and when partly submerged, they can be struck with a hammer. But this also didn't help. They even brought in a violinist who played for the orca during high tide. People still hope to return the animal to the open ocean. Many violin notes resemble orca vocalizations, so the plan was a good one. And the orca even seemed interested, but still didn't swim away. In the end, the calf spent over a month in the lagoon, then managed to get out on its own and swim away. Maybe it gave up, or perhaps on the contrary, it found the strength to keep on living. Unfortunately, this isn't a happy ending because orcas are too social, which means the young female will need to find her pod. It must belong somewhere, otherwise it won't work out. The question is where exactly and how long it'll take to find it. Can a 2-year-old calf survive alone? I hope so. Let's wish her luck. And also hit the like button. See you later.